find music, you can find, like I said, my students find this stuff like videos of dancing bears in the circus and stuff. So it's an amazing resource, and I love YouTube. For instance, in the very first week of class this year, I brought in a YouTube video of the Russian Sesame Street version of their alphabet song when we were learning the alphabet, and they got to sing. They don't really have an alphabet song in Russian like we do in English, but Sesame Street in Russia did their own, version of the Russian alphabet. So you can find, if you just kind of search around, it doesn't necessarily, I don't think, for the purposes of getting the students excited, you don't have to be an authority necessarily on the culture. But if you search and find something like that, like I didn't know that alphabet song before, I had never seen it before, but it was fun and it was cute and the students loved it. So that's my best advice. I think the internet really brings the world to you.
Any other questions?
I wanted to comment on that, sort of expand on what you said, and then I have a specific question for you. There are a few resources, and I guess it gets to the question of whether you want to focus on a big or a small C, as Alyssa pointed out. But there's a great text called American Cultural Patterns that sort of systematically analyzes and compares some of the underlying cultural assumptions that Anglophones tend to have with specific discrete examples, not specifically to Latin America or Spain, but in general. And I suspect that there are probably texts that look specifically at Latin America and Spain, but that's the one that comes to mind. And then my specific question for you is, this is fantastic and quite impressive. How much time do you spend on this? And more to the point, you can't spend that much. You can't be devoting so much time to doing all of this. So what are your techniques or strategies to get this done in a relatively efficient manner?
Well, first of all, this is a course that I've now probably been teaching for 8 years or so.
Sure.
So part of it has grown up over time.
Sure.
And you can't do it all at once. Another thing is that I don't do a ton of this. I mean, some of it just happens in the course of things, but in terms of these kinds of activities that I've just demonstrated, I try to do about one a week.
Sure. Well,
so, it's not a ton, but it's kind of a manageable amount. But really, once you get into the habit of how to think about what sorts of skills you want to develop, what sorts of reading strategies, I have a couple others that I thought about bringing in but didn't, where they listen to a song, and like when we're doing the prepositional case, this particular song that has tons of prepositional case phrases in it, and you do it with blanks, and they go through and they listen to the song and they try to fill in all the prepositional case phrases that are missing, and then you talk through and then you give them the full text with it filled in. So you start with the blanks and you fill in. Things like that. If you learn those kinds of strategies, then you can kind of apply it to the new material. You don't have to spin your wheels as much as you do at first. Also with texts like that, with poems, with songs, you can find a lot of those texts online. So you don't have to take the time to type them up.
Sure.
Or you can copy them, Xerox them. So that saves time. So there's certain, but once, I would say, to put a new activity like this together wouldn't take more than an hour.
Okay.
Once you get practiced at it.
Sure.
If you have the materials you need.
Any other questions? Should we move on to the...
Sure. Should I do that now? Yeah. Sure. So I was asked to put together, I guess I can just was asked to put together some questions for discussion, and we'll just go through them. How long do I have? 2. Yeah, okay. So I'll just kind of go through them, and you feel free to respond to, whichever ones appeal to you. There's not necessarily a particular order. The first question is whether you think of literature per se as a form of culture, or whether you think that culture is something distinct from literature, or is it something that incorporates literature but is bigger than literature? And how is your answer that you give to that question reflected or not reflected in the design of your language program's curriculum, and why do you think that is? I think that these are all big questions that are intended more for you to take with you and continue thinking about than necessarily to answer right here and now. The second one, what tensions do you experience in the beginning level curriculum between the demands of teaching elementary language skills and the demands of teaching culture with a small c and culture with a big C? And here's some issues that play into that: time constraints, which for us at least is a huge one. Textbook design, language of cultural instruction. Is it okay to teach culture in English, or is that not permissible in your particular program? And instructor-centered versus student-centered cultural explorations, what the proper balance for that is. Secondly, thirdly, about the upper level curriculum, what tensions do you experience between the teaching of literature and the teaching of culture, both high and low? And here are the issues that I thought of were time constraints, your program's focus and curricular design, the students' interests, faculty expertise, because not all faculty are trained, or most are not probably trained, who are professionally in the languages and literature to teach even low C culture, small C culture, let alone painting, music, etc. So faculty expertise and also faculty desire. Language of cultural instruction once again, and the same instructor versus student-centered question. And finally, this is more of a kind of hands-on activity that you may want to continue thinking about onward, but a suggestion to brainstorm several activities at whichever language level you teach that would teach explicit cultural material while also giving students practice with language areas such as some of those that I talked about in those particular activities: sociolinguistic competence, like in the greetings one, the film clip, vocabulary building, which was the case in actually most of these, listening comprehension skills, and grammar skills. So feel free to respond to whichever feels.
Well, I'm number 4. But I teach English to international students, so it's a little different. But I've used New Yorker ads, and because they're very brilliant, very unusual quite often, and they almost always revolve around language in some way or another, more so than many. So anyway, I was just going to say those work beautifully, and that's a very easy thing to do because you can just copy them and then copy more of them. And students really respond to that. So I suppose when you're teaching another language, you could find a colorful magazine that would have good ads.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think it is important to give some kind of pedagogical structure to using something like that. If you can kind of tell the students what to focus on, it helps direct their learning more.
What we worked on was idioms.
Well, then, then
you
of
have
course,
lots of idioms.
Exactly. Then it's perfect. Yeah. Great.
In sort of reading number 2, I almost feel like the question could be recast as sort of what is the tension between including any culture at all in the first sort of the early curriculum. In that, and it sort of came up in a talk that Nina Garrett, who was just here visiting, gave in my applied linguistics class, and essentially she was saying we should be teaching more explicit grammar, which is something that you sort of have to do in Russian in particular because of the deep learning curve at the start. And she said the problem is, so the tension here is that students tend to get bored very quickly with any sort of explicit grammar instruction. And I saw the comment up there by one of your students, something like, this really jives up the drudgery of, of going through the grammar. So that almost seems to be more the crux of the issue in some ways, though this is an important one, sort of big and small c. But it seems that most students, at least initially in that first semester or first year, and I may be wrong here, so feel free to correct me, but maybe trying to figure out, is this something that's for me? And in order to sort of lead them in, you probably feel a little compulsion to include that, just to say, you should be studying this language because it gives you access to this insight and this, these weird things that are happening that you don't quite understand and seem so exotic and maybe exciting.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is, and they love it. They eat it up.
We had a discussion earlier about the use of the triad language or the use of the native language to teach culture, and I thought that was very interesting because I didn't really think of that not language may be equal in terms of culture and which language we should present it. You mentioned that in Russia